The Supreme Court chamber was supposed to be one of the most controlled, almost sacred spaces in the American system. The ceiling arched high above, carved with intricate designs meant to remind everyone present of justice, dignity, and centuries of law. The walls carried the weight of history, and the very air seemed to hum with an expectation of order. On that morning, everything looked normal. Lawyers shuffled papers. Justices whispered in measured tones. Journalists tapped at their keyboards. But beneath that calm surface, a storm was brewing, and only a handful of people could sense it. You could almost feel the tension if you had been there yourself. Imagine sitting in one of those wooden benches, waiting for something monumental to unfold. You wouldn't have known what it was, but the subtle cues were impossible to ignore. Few staffers looked more nervous than usual. The justices' eyes darted toward one another a little too quickly. Even the guards at the back of the chamber shifted their stance, as if they had been warned this might not be a normal day. The spotlight, of course, wasn't supposed to be on her. Jasmine Crockett wasn't expected to dominate the room, at least not on the schedule. Court proceedings usually follow a predictable rhythm: statements, rebuttals, clarifications, and in the end, the pronouncement. But Crockett was never the kind of person who blended quietly into any script written by others. She carried herself with a mix of boldness and authenticity that made people either love her or despise her. And on this day, that energy was like gasoline waiting for a single spark. Now, if you've been following American politics, you already know Donald Trump has a way of turning even the most ordinary settings into spectacles. Whether it's a rally, a press briefing, or a courtroom, his mere presence transforms the mood. Supporters see a warrior who refuses to be silenced. Critics see a man itching to twist the rules in his favor. And that day at the Supreme Court, he came in with the same signature swagger, chin raised, lips tight, eyes scanning like he owned the room. People leaned forward, whispering, some nervously, some excitedly. Was this going to be just another Trump show, or was something different about to unfold? Then came the first subtle shift. Crockett leaned forward, her eyes locked not just on the justices, but on Trump himself. She wasn't there to play the role of background character in someone else's drama. And if you've ever seen her in a heated debate, you know her body language speaks louder than her words. Chin tilted up, eyebrows arched, lips pressed tight until she's ready to release a line that cuts like glass. For a moment, the courtroom still looked calm, at least on the outside. The murmurs died down. Reporters paused mid-typing. The sense of anticipation grew thicker, almost cinematic. If this were a movie, you'd say the director just held the frame a few seconds longer, letting the audience know something was about to break. And here's where you, the viewer, need to lean in. Ask yourself, when was the last time a Supreme Court session had you glued to every detail? It's not exactly Netflix entertainment. But this wasn't just law. This was raw politics, clashing personalities, and the kind of confrontation that could ripple far beyond those marble walls. The justices tried to maintain order, their faces carefully neutral, as though the robes they wore could protect them from the storm gathering at their feet. But everyone knew neutrality would not last, because Crockett wasn't interested in polite pauses or carefully phrased questions. She had come armed with words that could shake not just the courtroom, but the country, and Trump. He hadn't yet exploded. He sat back, perhaps underestimating her, perhaps thinking it would be another easy exchange he could dominate with a sharp jab or a dismissive sneer. But the thing about underestimating someone like Crockett is that the mistake doesn't just backfire, detonates in front of millions watching. So the stage was set. The Supreme Court, often a place of measured tradition, had been transformed into a powder keg. Crockett's eyes didn't blink. Trump's ego was quietly simmering. Audience both in the chamber and across the nation was waiting, almost holding its breath, and in that silence, in that fragile calm, you knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary day in America. This was the calm before a storm that would change the conversation for weeks, maybe months. A confrontation no one had planned, but everyone would remember. The words didn't come like a shout. They didn't need to. Crockett's voice cut through the room, not because of volume, but because of precision. Calm, measured. Every syllable carried the kind of authority that can make even seasoned politicians shift in their chairs. She started with what seemed like a simple statement, but within seconds, it was clear this was no ordinary cross-examination. This was a confrontation designed to strip away layers of power, like ego and illusion. Asterisk, you could almost hear the nation leaning in closer. Television anchors froze mid-sentence. Viewers at home gripped their remotes, some ready to cheer, others ready to rage. But nobody was ready to ignore it. Asterisk, her target wasn't just the issue at hand. It was bigger. Much bigger. Crockett wasn't afraid to connect the dots that so many others tiptoed around. She framed her challenge in a way that forced everyone, justices, Trump, and the American public to confront what had been whispered for months. The question of influence, of unchecked power, and yes, the shadows cast by Melania Trump herself. Asterisk, now think about that for a second. In most political arenas, mentioning a spouse is taboo, almost off limits. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned into it. And suddenly the chamber wasn't just about law anymore. It was about loyalty, transparency, and the uncomfortable idea that personal lives were spilling into the nation's highest court. Asterisk, Trump's face changed in an instant. You know that look, jaw tightening, lips pursed, the eyes narrowing just enough to signal both anger and disbelief. He had walked in with confidence, but Crockett's words struck harder than he anticipated. His composure cracked, not in a dramatic meltdown, at least not yet, but in the subtle, visible way that makes audiences gasp. Asterisk, wait, did she just say that? Asterisk, that's the kind of reaction people had. It was the line that stopped conversations. Mid-sentence in coffee shops, the quote that would dominate headlines before the ink even hit the presses. Crockett didn't just confront Trump. She confronted the narrative he had built, the image of control he worked so hard to maintain. Asterisk, and here's where the emotion kicked in. Fear for some, excitement for others. Fear, because the stakes of such a public confrontation in the Supreme Court meant instability, uncertainty, maybe even chaos. Excitement because for the first time in a long time, someone was speaking with a clarity and fire that didn't tiptoe around power. Dangerous and thrilling. Asterisk, but Crockett wasn't done. She wove her words carefully, each one building toward a crescendo. She challenged contradictions, pointed out hypocrisies, and did it with a sharp wit that made some in the chamber chuckle nervously. Humor, even in that heavy room, was her weapon. If this were just about law, she quipped, we wouldn't be spending so much time pretending not to see what's right in front of us. Double quotes. Asterisk. The justices shifted, some leaning back, others forward. It was one of those moments when even the most stoic of judges couldn't completely hide curiosity. And the crowd. The crowd was electrified. Asterisk, meanwhile, Trump couldn't stay still. His fingers drummed against the table. His posture stiffened. His gaze darted back and forth as though looking for an escape hatch. Every second Crockett spoke. She pulled the spotlight tighter, leaving him less space to maneuver. Asterisk, and then it happened. The spark. Trump leaned forward, his microphone catching the sharpness of his voice. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was raw, visceral. He lashed back, trying to dismiss her words as nonsense, trying to pull the weight of the court onto his side. But the more he spoke, the more obvious it became. He wasn't controlling the room anymore. He was reacting, defending, exposed. Asterisk, and here's the question for you, the viewer. When was the last time you saw Trump on the defensive, truly cornered by words instead of applause? That's why this moment mattered. It wasn't just about the confrontation itself. It was about the shift of power, the inversion of roles. For once, Trump wasn't the one dictating the tempo. Crockett was. Asterisk. And if you felt your pulse quicken, hearing this, you weren't alone. Across America, living rooms and offices and phone screens buzzed with the same thought. This is history in the making. Asterisk, the Supreme Court had become an arena. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was only just. Asterisk, the silence after Trump's outburst was almost louder than the words themselves. Think about it, those marble walls of the Supreme Court, usually soaked in legal jargon and stiff decorum, suddenly felt like the stage of a high-stakes drama. Nobody breathed too loudly. Nobody dared move. Everyone was waiting to see what Crockett would do next. Asterisk and Crockett. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice to match Trump's volume. No, she leaned back ever so slightly, gave the kind of smirk that says, "You just walked into my trap. Let the tension hang for just long enough to sting." Asterisk, this wasn't just strategy. It was theater. And in politics, theater is power. Asterisk, you could almost feel the viewers at home leaning even closer to their screens. Because this was the kind of moment where the story changes. Would Crockett crumble under Trump's explosive energy? Or would she rise and seize the narrative completely? She chose the latter. With calm precision, Crockett pointed out how Trump's own words contradicted not just the record, but his previous testimonies. And then, with a perfectly timed pause, she turned the spotlight toward Melania, not in a sensational, tabloid kind of way, but in the subtle, cutting manner that drew gasps from both allies and critics alike. Asterisk, are we here to serve the Constitution, she asked, her voice steady, or to protect the personal interests of those who think they stand above it? Asterisk. Boom. The chamber shook, not literally, but emotionally. That was the line. That was the question that pierced through the marble, the robes, the cameras, and went straight to the American conscience. Asterisk. Trump shifted uncomfortably, his hands tightening into fists on the table. He wasn't used to being addressed like this. Not in a courtroom, not on live broadcast, not by someone he had once dismissed as a lightweight. The rage was there, boiling under the surface, but the more he lashed back, the more Crockett seemed to control the tempo. Asterisk, it was almost like a dance. He lunged with anger. She sidestepped with precision, tried to dominate with volume. She countered with calm clarity. And with every move, the audience began to see it. Trump wasn't winning this battle. Asterisk, and let's pause here for just a second because you, as a viewer, need to ask yourself, how many times have you seen someone flip the script like this on Trump? Do it so effectively that even the justices had to hide their reactions behind blank expressions. That's why this moment was different. Asterisk now. Crockett knew she couldn't just rely on sharp words. She needed to land evidence concrete, undeniable, and unshakable. So, she laid it out piece by piece, inconsistencies, timelines, connections that, when spoken aloud, suddenly painted a picture that no amount of bravado could erase. Asterisk, and the best part? She did it with humor. Not the kind of humor that gets cheap, laughs, but the sharp, surgical humor that slices through tension. At one point, when Trump tried to interrupt her mid-sentence, she stopped, tilted her head, and said, "Mr. Trump, if you'd like to answer the questions you asked yourself, I'll happily yield the floor." The room erupted in nervous chuckles. Even one of the justices covered a smile with their hand. Asterisk. That was Crockett's genius, keeping the room on edge but never letting it fall into chaos. Asterisk, meanwhile. The media outside was losing its mind. Reporters tweeted furiously. Headlines were, "Already being drafted, Crockett corners Trump in Supreme Court standoff. Melania dragged into high court drama, unprecedented showdown shocks Washington." Asterisk, and as for the public? Social media feeds lit up like fireworks. Hashtags trended within minutes. Some users typed in all caps, cheering her on. "This is what courage looks like." Others fumed, claiming it was an ambush, a disgrace, a circus. In the highest court? But here's the truth. Love her or hate her, nobody could ignore Crockett anymore. Asterisk, back in the chamber, Trump finally snapped. His voice cracked, his finger pointed across the table as he accused Crockett of lies, of disrespect, of undermining the court itself. But here's the kicker. The more he exploded, the calmer she looked. That contrast, rage versus poise, burned itself into the memory of everyone watching. Asterisk, and maybe that's why the fear kicked in. Not just for Trump's supporters, but for the system itself. Because what Crockett was doing wasn't just bold, It was destabilizing. It raised questions about accountability, about influence, about whether the court itself could remain untouched by politics. Asterisk for those watching. In real time, it was equal parts terrifying and thrilling. Terrifying because of the stakes. Thrilling because, finally, someone had the audacity to speak truth in a place where silence was often the norm. Asterisk and Crockett. She wasn't done. She leaned forward, locked eyes with Trump, and delivered the kind of line that instantly felt like history. If the truth makes you explode.
Oh.
Maybe the truth isn't your enemy, it's your reflection. Asterisk, and with that, the room went silent again. Dead silent. Asterisk, the act was far from over. But the balance of power had already shifted. Asterisk, the silence stretched across the chamber like a drawn-out breath. If you were there, you'd feel it pressing on. Your chests, the weight of something monumental hanging in the air. Crockett had not just survived Trump's explosion. She had turned it into fuel. And now, all eyes were on her. Asterisk, this wasn't politics as usual anymore. It was raw drama, the kind that makes even seasoned reporters forget to blink. Crockett understood that silence could be louder than noise. She held it, owned it, then leaned forward with calm authority. Asterisk, this chamber is not a stage for tantrums. She said slowly, her voice steady but sharp. It is a place for truth. The American people are watching. Asterisk, that line landed like a thunderclap. It wasn't aimed only at Trump. It was directed at the justices, the journalists, and millions watching at home. A challenge, a dare. It worked. The room leaned in. Asterisk Trump, by contrast, looked unsettled. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless. He muttered under his breath, shaking his head like a man trying to convince himself of his own story. For perhaps the first time in that chamber, he looked smaller than the moment. Asterisk Crockett saw it and pressed harder. Step by step, connecting timelines, contradictions, testimonies, until the picture became clear. She wasn't shouting, slicing surgically, stripping away excuses. Asterisk, then came the dangerous turn Melanian's name. Could almost hear the collective gasp. But Crockett didn't exploit it like gossip. She used precision, citing public statements, official appearances, and the cracks between them. It wasn't about dragging a first lady through the mud. It was about credibility, integrity, and by bringing her in, Crockett showed that no one was off limits when truth was at stake. Asterisk, the justices shifted. They weren't supposed to reveal emotion, but their body language betrayed them: tensed shoulders, pursed lips, uneasy glances. They knew this was bigger than a shouting match. It was accountability knocking on the court's marble door. Asterisk, and then Crockett shifted gears. She gave the chamber and the nation humor. Mr. Trump wants this to be about me attacking him, she said with a faint smile. But let's be clear. I didn't write his contradictions. I did. I'm just here reading the script he left behind. Asterisk, the ripple of restrained laughter broke the tension. Some chuckles, some gasps, even a few stifled smiles from the press gallery. Online, that line was already turning into memes. Trump fuming under captions like written by Trump, performed by Crockett. Asterisk, Trump didn't laugh. His face reddened. His lips pressed into a tight line. It was being dismantled not with rage but with wit-tand that was worse. Asterisk humor wasn't just entertainment. It was strategy. It kept Crockett from seeming too harsh, made her relatable to the public, and left Trump perpetually off balance. Each time he lashed out, she countered with calm sharpness. Each time he tried to dominate, she undercut him with precision. It was like rhetorical judo as force turned against him. Asterisk, but behind the laughs was a deeper current. This was about more than one confrontation. It was about shifting the balance of power. If someone could stand toe-to-toe with Trump inside the Supreme Court itself, and not only survive but thrive, then maybe the myth of his untouchability was finally cracking. Asterisk. And you could feel the dual emotions coursing through America: fear and excitement. Fear among those who relied on Trump's dominance. Excitement among those who longed to see it challenged. Asterisk Crockett closed her part of the exchange with words that cut deeper than any shout could. Power doesn't make you right. Shouting doesn't make you truthful. Running from accountability doesn't make you innocent. Asterisk the gavel struck for order. The justices called for calm. But the moment had already slipped into history. Asterisk what had begun as another day in the chamber had transformed into something unforgettable. And though that act was closing, the nation knew the drama was far from over. Asterisk. When the gavel struck, order might have returned to the chamber, but outside those walls, chaos was erupting. The second Crockett's words hit the air, America was already reacting. In newsrooms across New York, Washington, and Los Angeles, producers barked at interns. Clip that moment. Get it online now. Asterisk, and they did. Within minutes, social media feeds exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett vs. Trump, hashtag Supreme Court showdown, and hashtag truth over tantrums trended simultaneously on Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. Think about that Supreme Court testimony. A realm usually reserved for legal scholars and policy wonks had gone viral with Gen Z memes. Asterisk cable news seized the moment. CNN cut to a replay, Wolf Blitzer's voice just barely hiding his astonishment. This was not just a courtroom exchange. This was a confrontation that could shift the political landscape. Over on Fox, the tone was different. Pundits scrambled to defend Trump, painting Crockett as disrespectful and grandstanding. MSNBC framed it as a long overdue reckoning. Asterisk. But no matter the spin, one thing was undeniable. America was glued to the screen. Families at dinner tables, college students in dorm rooms, truckers on long hauls with radio news, it didn't matter where you were. Everyone had an opinion, and no one could ignore it. Asterisk, imagine being at a bar in Chicago, where the TVs flickered between baseball highlights and breaking news. Every head turned when Crockett's line played. I didn't write his contradictions. He did. The room broke into applause, strangers clinking glasses. Meanwhile, at a diner in rural Texas, patrons muttered about media bias, shaking their heads. That was the divide in real time. Shock and admiration in some places, disbelief, and anger in others, Asterisk and Trump. His team scrambled. Press statements were drafted, allies lined up for interviews, Twitter posts fired out in rapid succession. But every attempt to spin the narrative felt like chasing smoke, because Crockett had done something rare she'd created a moment that couldn't be isolated. REFRAMED. Asterisk the justices, meanwhile, were caught in an awkward position. Normally, their detachment shielded them from the storm. But this was different. Cameras caught Chief Justice Roberts pursing his lips, Justice Kagan lowering her gaze, and even Justice Alito shifting uncomfortably. Subtle cues, but enough to fuel endless commentary. Asterisk and the commentators did what they do best. Unprecedented. Explosive. A crack in the armor. The words repeated across networks like a drumbeat. The spectacle wasn't just being reported, it was being mythologized as it unfolded. Asterisk, but let's pause here, because this is where the emotional intensity really takes root. You weren't just watching Crockett versus Trump. You were watching America wrestle with its self-truth. Against power. Defiance against dominance. Fear rippled through Trump loyalists. If Crockett could corner him here in the highest court in the land, what did that mean for future battles? What did it mean for his image of invulnerability? On the other hand, excitement surged among critics, who had long felt silenced. For them, Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman, she was a proxy. A voice saying what millions had wanted to scream for years. Asterisk and humor carried it further. Memes spread faster than wildfire. A split-screen shot of Crockett calm and composed next to Trump's red. Angry face carried captions like debate night energy versus Monday morning coffee. Late-night comedians opened their monologues with Crockett's one-liners, replaying the clip with exaggerated impressions of Trump's fury. Asterisk, but beneath the laughter was a real shift. The confrontation had become a cultural touchstone. People weren't just asking, did you see what happened? They were asking, what does this mean? It's asterisk. The symbolism was too powerful to ignore. A black woman standing firm in the Supreme Court refusing to bend under the weight of Trump's fury. It cut across history, across America's unresolved tensions about race, gender, and power. For many, it was more than politics. It was representation. News outlets in London, Paris, and Tokyo ran segments. Headlines framed it as America's reckoning or the moment power was challenged in the court. Meanwhile, Trump's closest allies doubled down, warning of witch hunts and vendettas. His rallies buzzed with chants, his supporters digging in deeper. But even within his base, whispers grew louder. Why did he lose control like that? That's the paradox. Fear and excitement weren't just emotions for viewers. They were shaping the political battlefield itself. Some feared the loss of dominance. Others felt exhilarated by the chance at accountability. By nightfall, America was split-screened in its emotions. On one half, fury and denial. On the other, relief and hope. But either way, everyone agreed on one thing. Crockett had shocked the system. And as dawn approached the next day, one question echoed louder than the rest. What happens now? The dust had barely settled when the reality hit. America was watching. And the echoes of Crockett's confrontation were everywhere. It wasn't just a Supreme Court hearing anymore. It was a moment that defined courage under scrutiny. A rare instance when one voice could challenge power so openly, and the entire country felt it. Newsrooms scrambled, social media feeds exploded, and your notifications buzzed nonstop. Even if you tried, you couldn't look away. Imagine being in your living room, coffee in hand, and replaying the moment. Crockett standing calm, unwavering, delivering lines that cut through decades of political bravado. Across the country, people reacted differently. Some cheered, others bristled, but all were drawn into the drama. It was as if the nation collectively leaned in, held its breath, and realized that for the first time in years, someone powerful was being called to account, and doing so without fear. Trump's reaction, predictably, was explosive. His fury, the flailing words, the red face, all played out in real time. Yet the more he raged, the stronger Crockett appeared. Calm, composed, and relentless, she turned every deflection into an opportunity, every accusation into a mirror reflecting truth back at him. For you, watching from the sidelines, it was electric. Fear, excitement, and awe collided in a single moment that refused to fade. Meanwhile, the aftershocks began. Talk shows replayed the clip endlessly, analyzing every inflection, every glance, every pause. Memes spread like wildfire. Humor became the vehicle for understanding, for processing the tension. You saw captions like debate night energy versus Supreme Court reality, juxtaposing Trump's rage with Crockett's poise. And as funny as it was, it underscored a serious truth. No one, no matter how powerful, was untouchable when confronted with courage. Beyond the spectacle. There was the substance. Crockett wasn't just exposing contradictions. She was issuing a challenge. Accountability wasn't optional, and America, whether ready or not, was forced to reckon with it. Fear rippled through the loyalists, uncertainty crept into political corners, and even casual observers couldn't help but wonder if she could stand up like this. What else could be challenged? What else could be questioned? That mix of fear and excitement created a potent energy. You felt it, didn't you? That tight twist in your chest, the adrenaline spike, the hope that justice could still prevail in unexpected ways. Crockett had transformed a legal proceeding into a national conversation about principle, integrity, and courage. And in that moment, the abstract concept of accountability became tangible, immediate, and urgent. But courage always carries a price. Crockett faced threats online, criticism in public forums, and attempts to diminish her achievement. And yet, her resolve remained unbroken. Watching her, you realize that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite it. She had chosen to confront, to speak truth, and to hold power to account, no matter the personal cost. And in doing so, She became more than a witness or a congresswoman. She became a symbol of what unwavering principle looks like in practice. Asterisk. The implications were broader than politics. This confrontation became a mirror for the nation. Who do you stand with? The dominant, untouchable figure, or the person willing to speak truth under pressure? Crockett's act wasn't just a spectacle, it was a lesson. It invited you to consider your own role in holding truth above power. Asterisk, as the hours turned to days, analysis continued. But the emotional impact endured. Fear of unchecked power and excitement at the display of courage coexisted, creating a tension that drove the public conversation. You could see it in debates, in tweets, in water cooler talk across the country. The confrontation had transcended a courtroom. It had become cultural, moral, and deeply human. Asterisk, and here's the ultimate takeaway. Moments like these are rare, but transformative. They remind us that accountability is not theoretical, it is enacted, one voice at a time. To Crockett's courage ignited conversation, inspired action, and showed that integrity is worth the risk. For you, for the nation, for history. It was a lesson in standing tall when it matters most. Asterisk. So don't let it fade into background noise. Subscribe, share, and stay part of the conversation. Witness courage, amplify truth, and remember that accountability begins when ordinary people refuse to look away. Crockett didn't just challenge power, she invited a nation to do the same. And now the question is yours. Will you answer?